And we are recording. This is welcome to class 31, which is one before 32. 32 is a special number, Lev, Lamed Beis. So, but we'll try and make this a special class also. Welcome. This is Faith and Calm, part 31. And we're talking about, fill me in on the title again here.
Oh my gosh, you have to know it. When you wonder, where was God?
Where you wonder, where was God? Okay,
Yes.
Good. Okay. And so I'm going to be talking about the beginning line of this week's Parsha, which is I think is a key idea in Judaism, because this is the first communication of God to the very first Jew. And that starts at this week's Parsha. God tells Avram, he wasn't called Abraham yet at that time. He says to him, Lech lecha ma'artzecha meladecha mebeis avicha, which translates as, go to yourself from your land, from your place of birth, from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. And being that it's the very first communication and the first thing we know about Abraham, who was the first Jew, it should have a global message for every single Jew, wherever they are. This is our mission statement. This is the beginning of who we're supposed to be and where we're going. But it doesn't sound very, very impressive. I mean, it just sounds like, it's time to move. You're going to move to Israel. You're going to go. So it's... we need to, so as usual, when something is hidden in the Torah and there's something deeper involved, the way you find out is you look at things that are a little hard to understand and contradictory in the statement. So the first one you see is it says, Lech lecha, go to yourself. That's not the way you say it even in Hebrew. You say just go, go, get going, go. Go to yourself. What do you mean to go to yourself? You're headed from here to there. The other one is the usual way that you tell a person if you need them to go somewhere is you say, you got to go there. I'm telling you where you're going. You don't tell them where you are. And God is telling Abraham, all about where he is. Go away from where you are, your land, your birthplace, your father's house. He knows where he's at. He knows where he's at. So why do you have to describe in such detail where you're at? And in three different ways, it was saying the same thing, basically. I know where I'm at. I'm living in 41 Portina. I'm on, in Brighton. I know where I'm at. You got to tell me where I'm at three different ways. And the biggest, strangest question is, that's not the way you say it. If I'm telling somebody to leave someplace, what I do is I say,
Some option. Go ahead.
I have to say, first leave Brighton, then leave Boston, and then leave Massachusetts, and then leave the United States. I don't put it in the other order, and it's in the wrong order. So all these like textual differences is really coming to help us understand a very important, not just a geographic command to Jews, but to every Jew in every single generation about existentially who we are and where we're supposed to, our powers are and who we are and where we can go. It's a psychological message, and it's an important one. And the message is basically goes as follows. And you have to sort of open yourself up, and you have to think with your heart, less with your mind, to understand this talk, as Rabbi YY said. And that's where I'm getting the conversation from, although he's driving it, I know, from which sichas from the Rebbe. So he says basically the idea here is that when you're born, you know who you are. But immediately there starts to develop certain influences in your life and expectations from your parents and people around you. And they start to become part of your story. And that story necessarily isn't always one that's expansive. Many times, many things that happen to us when we're little, they affect us, and we don't even know that they affect us, but we carry it for us with the rest of our lives. If you have parents that are stressed out or don't have enough time to be affectionate or are distant or something like that, you sort of get a message that you're not that important. And as the Rebbe pointed out once, if you make a scratch in a big tree and its bark, it doesn't affect it too much. But if you affect the little tiny sapling, it's a blemish that affects the tree for the rest of its life. So when we're little messages, I think our psychologists could tell us, that's why you go back to your asking about your parents and your upbringing. It's very important, and they have big effects. They have, So Sari says she can't hear.
me.
I can't hear you, but I don't see that something strange with Sari's thing, because I don't
Yeah.
see any. I don't get any video.
Sorry, call in again.
Try it again, because I'm not seeing that you can mute you, and I don't know that I think that's
Sorry.
why I can't.
I can see her.
I
No,
can
you
see her.
but she can't hear.
She can't hear.
So, can you text her? Can you send her a chat?
Yes, let me tell her.
Chat, yeah, say try again. Try loading again. Load again. Okay, good.
Okay.
Good. Okay,
All right. Good. I just had to tell her that.
Okay, go ahead.
So anyway, these things have an effect on us, and let's get just to an extreme case. Rabbi Waiwai tells a story of a lady that came to him, and she was having issues, and part of the issue was that when she was a little child, her mother used to tell her over and over again, I love you, and do you know why I love you? Because you're a blonde girl. Now, the problem was that she wasn't blonde, and her mother used to dye her hair every day, dye her hair and make her blonde. And so now that she's grown up, yes, the lady, she dyes her hair every day to be blonde, because even though she knows that that's part of the story that she carries, she can't get rid of that feeling that, that she's lovable because she's blonde. These things go very deep, and people say they try and make you, they want you to be a good person, and so you feel like you have to become perfect. You have to do this right, and you have to be always awake, and you have to be ready, and you have to be organized, and you have to be, so all these things have become part of what our story, our restrictive story. And it's not who we really are, because it's not accepting us basically as I am. I can just be. And no, there are people around, and they're not intentionally being bad, but some of those messages we carry with us. And it's important to start identifying those messages, because they have a big effect on our lives. So that is partially what the Parsha is telling you. It says there is the stories of your life, and then there is you. Lech lecha means go to you. You are not necessarily the stories and the things that you think about who you are, or the various needs. So you might, because as we grow up, we look for affirmations from other people, acknowledgments from other people. And what happens is eventually, sometimes we become dependent on those things to be able to feel that who I am. So I'm trying to be perfect. I'm trying to meet up to other people's expectations. And, and these are important psychological issues that a person has to deal with, because in truth, you are a piece of God. You are a part of he breathes your life force into you every day, and he'll never remove himself from you, and he'll always love you. And these other things, they come and they go, but they affect us very much. And the problem is that sometimes this changes us. So the message of Lech Lecha, Ma'artzecha, Maladcha, Bebeis Avicha is basically, there are 3 different levels of these kind of stories that we have to recognize and identify how they're affecting our lives. The first one is your country, Artzecha, your land. So an American is different than a Russian. A Russian is different than Israeli. Israeli is different than somebody who's born in England. Every country has a particular effect on us, and that affects part of who we think we are and how we think about the world. And that is a big effect. But there's a deeper effect, which is Maladcha, the people in your community, your teachers, your neighbors, the people you grew up with, that kind of environment. And that has a bigger effect. Rabbi Waiwai gives an example. It was a friend of his who was having a bar mitzvah for his son. He was a 40-year-old man. And he asked Rabbi Wai, you're a friend of mine. Can you tell me, did I ever amount to anything? And Rabbi Wai says, of course, look at your family, beautiful family, big kid, good, great. Why do you ask such a question? He says, because when I was little, somebody in the school said, you're never going to amount to anything. And it affected me. And he says, how much did it affect you? And he says, every day I think about it. So, a little message to a child, to us in school, from teachers, from so forth, and, pushing you in the back of the room, whatever, these have effects of us. They affect our personality and who we are. And it's very important to be able to identify what those particular things are. And of course, from your parents, it's even more so. It has a tremendous effect. I don't know if I told you the story, but I thought it was very interesting. There's one lady, and she says she has a big problem ever sitting on a couch. Why? Because her mother, whenever she saw her when she was little sitting on the couch, says, what are you just sitting there for? Meaning, so she got this message basically that she only exists and that she's only important when she's doing things, but you can't just be. So that's a denial of who I am. I am somebody when I'm doing something, but if I'm not doing something, then I'm not accepted. So all these messages, all these stories have a very strong effect on who we are. And the message of Lech Lecha is you are free and you are independent and you are connected with God and you have intrinsic worth and you can identify these things. So you have to do two steps. First, you have to say, I'm not perfect. And I do have these stories and I don't have to get rid of them, but I do have to notice that when they are affecting who I am and how they're affecting me. And the second thing is then you have to be able to say, there's a part of me that's not that part of the story. And that's who I'm supposed to be. So you're never limited and you're never constrained. And this is an important lesson. It's an important lesson you see in what's going on in the world too. There are a lot of people who think that they're, Karl Marx. Karl Marx said, we are who we are because of how the economic status that we are. And he's, this was a nice Jewish guy, right? Karl Marx. And he said, you'll never feel like a fulfilled people until, everybody is equal and everybody has the same values. Well, it didn't work so well. Marxism, socialism didn't work so well. Because, people are different and they have different skills and they have different talents and, and some people are more equal than others in the words of Animal Farm. And it just didn't work. It just doesn't work very well. So this is also a message, that it's not, you don't have to riot and kill and attack if I'm not getting what I want, because you have a value that's not necessarily dependent on your economic worth or on your DNA or whoever you were born. So a lot of the anger you see in projecting outwards in society, I think, is partially also related to this, that people don't realize you have value. You are not a victim. You don't think of yourself as a victim. And if you think of yourself as a victim, then yeah, you will be angry and you will be yelling and you'll be protesting and you'll be doing this and you'll be mad at this guy or you'll be mad at that. And you'll be judgmental of other people, because where does judgmentalism basically come from? It comes from feeling, that I have to feel better about myself. So I have to look at what I see somebody else is bad and then feel bad, and angry at him about what he's doing or what she's doing. Look what she did. Look at what kind of a person she is. So she did this, she did that. And so forth. So a lot of these things that we're seeing, the psychological brouhaha, anger and turmoil in the world, I think is also related to this. So this is part of the mission of the Jew. Abraham was the first Jew, and he stood against the entire world, all the idolatry, and everybody else had one particular viewpoint. And he said, no, I'm going to introduce something new. And we all have that in our genes, to be able to say, I am a Jew and I can stand up independently of the whole rest of the world. And I don't have to necessarily follow the same script as everyone else in the world. I can be an independent person, and we have a message to give to the world. You have value. Everybody has values in the eyes of the most important person, most important being, God. And you can't take that away from them, because he doesn't need validation from the rest of the world. And so you don't need validation. Just find out who you are. Stop trying to live up to a script of you have to have a certain amount of money or certain this or certain that and so forth. Everybody has their own, and everybody has the values and advantages that other people don't have. Anyway, so I guess that's a little bit of a heady talk, but I thought that was a useful concept to start out the week on. And if my wife is around, or if there's any questions, we can continue there. Or yes, Shalom Meshudas? Shalom Meshudas? Oh, all right. Well, we'll open the floor to questions, and I'll try and find her again. Maybe she went to the bathroom. Shalom Meshudas? Okay, so she's 1 minute. So everybody can go.
Amy had a question, and then I have a question. I don't know if Amy, you want to go first? She has to unmute. Oh, okay.
Okay.
And given the way people are behaving today, though, what is going to turn them around if they don't realize that they have their own value? I mean, how does, how does the world get better if most people don't know what you just explained?
Abraham and Sarah, I think, did it one by one. They said they converted pieces of the world, Haran and so forth. We only really to monotheism, not necessarily Judaism, but at least the really not to worship idolatry, which is that there's forces and powers that are somehow can obstruct God, and that's not true. So I think but I think there's two parts to this. One part is, yes, we only have control over the particular circle of individuals that we come in contact with. And that can have a ripple effect, and that can work like, an atomic chain, can have more and more and more people. But the other fact is that, there's a certain energy that Jews have been doing for the last 3,333 years. And we may not see that influence in the world, but every mitzvah we do actually does cause a change in the world. And that's because that's such a powerful change. That's exactly why we don't necessarily appreciate it or feel that particular effect. So when I put the tefillin on my head, or somebody lights Shabbos candles, or somebody else decides to start keeping kosher, or another person keeping Shabbos, we don't necessarily see that energy that's transforming the world. But there's an energy that is released, and it's building, and it's building, and it's building. And we don't see it because of the nature of how powerful that is, and how it would obliterate the entire world from its ability to be free and independent if it actually was revealed. But it is having an effect. And the cumulative effect of all the mitzvahs that we're doing has that kind of power. They used to say that this is pre-World War II, that if a bacher in the yeshiva somewhere in Lithuania was stopped looking at his Gemara, that would have an effect on an American Jew in the United States. We don't know how these energies and these powers have, and what we're doing is what we're doing, but they do have a very big effect. And in the mitzvahs that we do, and the faith that we have, and the prayers that we have, actually do have tremendous power and effect. And it's because of how they're powerful they are that we don't necessarily see them. So I think there are changes. Now you have to open your eyes. My wife is you're gonna have some stories about this? Yes. Okay, good. So we'll move on to her, and she'll tell you about things that you may not notice in the news, because news always likes to disguise what's happening as bad. And but there are very, very encouraging things that are happening in this world right now. And if you're in tune to that and you open your eyes, you'll feel it. And I think it's very useful for us to do that, because we do need to have that kind of inspiration every once in a while when we're dealing with all the negative stuff that's happening. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haskell Shimon.
Sure.
Hi, Molly.
Hi, Emily. How are you? Hi, Amy.
Hanging in.
Sorry, Yael, you're hanging in there.
Hi, Amy. Hi, Yael. Hi, Molly. Hi, Suri. And hi, anyone else who's
Hi,
listening.
Shulamis.
Okay, good. Hi, everyone else who's listening. Okay, good. So here we go. So this is session 31. And I want to say that before we begin, that this session is predicated on a question from one of you, from one of our holy listeners, our holy participants, and who texted me a few weeks ago about something that just blew her mind, and where was Hashem, and anyway, so this is in response to that, and the title of the class is "When You Wonder, Where Was God?" So so before I begin, I want to say the four things that I always say, that that the thrust of my section of the class is that number one, we're in an extraordinary time, a completely extraordinary time. And not because of what we see on TV or what we see on the internet. It's not because of that. We're in an extraordinary time because the Lubavitcher Rebbe told us that the Geula, the redemption of the entire world, is unfolding. And I have to tell you, maybe I told you in a previous class, that rabbis in previous and centuries ago would say, "Thank God I'm not living in that time because it's going to be so hard." Can you imagine? So we merit to live in that time. And as I say, each class, each session, Hashem didn't leave us alone. He gave us the Torah, which is the most incredible guidebook to life and to our times. And he gave us also mitzvahs, which are our power tools. And it's so interesting that Yeskel Shimon just said what he said, because in school, I try and teach the kids every day something new about Mashiach. We have something called Mashiach Minute. And so our Mashiach Minute today was exactly what Yeskel Shimon said, that, when we make a blessing on an apple, when we make a bracha on an apple before we're about to eat the apple, do we see the holiness that we create? Do we see the wild holiness that shoots out everywhere? No. And why don't we see it? So we don't see it because if we saw it, it would completely destroy our free choice. It would be so easy to do mitzvahs. It would be so easy to do everything because we would say, "Whoa, look what I can do." So Hashem doesn't want that. He wants us to get there with our own steam. He wants us to fight and battle and fight your own inner thing that says, "I don't want to do that," and just do the right thing. And so, because that will be precious to us. It says that a person prefers one piece of pie that he made himself to 9 pieces of pie that somebody else gives him. And regardless of who, your baking abilities, somebody likes their own, we're very, we feel great about something we did ourselves. And so mitzvahs are not easy. But after we see Mashiach, we will see what we did. We'll see the magnificent tapestry that we created with our good deeds. So anyway, so Hashem gave us mitzvahs, he gave us the Torah, and he gave us leaders like Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, and like the Rebbe. And they're, the most precious thing that Hashem could possibly have given us, because it's, and I'll add a little bit here that what is a Rebbe? What is Moshe Rabbeinu? When a Jew first learns these concepts, there's a natural reaction. I remember I said, excuse me, I have a relationship with God. I don't want anybody in between. I have my own relationship with God. And absolutely true, 100% absolutely true. A Rebbe or Moshe Rabbeinu that's not their purpose. Their purpose is not to get in the middle. Their purpose is to connect, so that when the Jew is like off here somewhere, the Rebbe leads them back to Hashem. A Rebbe is like glue, not like an interference, but like glue, or like a leader that leads a little lamb that ran totally off the wrong path, leads him back to the water, leads him back to the right thing. So the Rebbe has been absolutely invaluable in my life on a daily basis. So anyway, okay, that's our preface. Now, the question, the title, When You Wonder Where Was God? So I'm going to tell you a brief little thing that I think about very, very often. One time when I was in a really, very bad situation, or I perceived it to be a very bad situation, and I was really having a very hard time. I spent some time with a wonderful woman who's no longer alive. Her name is Mrs. Sari Goldworm. I'm going to show you her picture. And here she is.
She was a magnificent woman. Just there's a reflection. She was an absolutely magnificent woman, a Hasidic lady, not Lubavitch, but she was very Lubavitch anyway. She learned all the stuff that the Rebbe says to learn. She went to see the Rebbe, but she's a magnificent lady. You know, like you could easily write children's books about her. She was larger than life, completely larger than life. And so when I had a problem, I knew who I had to go to. I went to Mrs. Goldworm. And I told her, you know, she helped me with my problem. And one time I was saying, why would God do this to me? Why? And Mrs. Goldworm said a line I will never forget. She said, you know what? Why is the most useless word in the English language.
Mm.
She said, much better is what? What can I do about it? What practical thing can I do to help myself or to help whoever is in this situation? Why is you know, we don't even understand one of the trillion cells in our body. How can we expect to wrap ourselves around and completely understand Hashem? We can't. So anyway, I try and remember that often. Why leads you totally to disaster, leads you to insanity. Why leads you to insanity? What leads you to sanity? What can I do right now? What could I do this minute? So now I'm going to tell you another story about that I started to, when we can't see Hashem, we can't understand, something blows our gaskets. Just 1 second. Something blows our gaskets. So a very wise rabbi, Sari knows him. He passed away this past year. His name was Rabbi Israel Tauber, magnificent, larger than life person. I have many of his books on my shelf. He was pretty much he was either the first or one of the first rabbis in my life, and he was extraordinarily deep and wonderful. I could talk for days about him and his life story. I should tell his life story sometime. But anyway, maybe that's a good thing to talk about. Maybe I will do that sometime. So Rabbi Tauber tells a story, and it helps very much in understanding what happens when you can't see Hashem. And I'll tell you the point ahead of time, and then you'll hear the story. The point ahead of time that Rabbi Tauber says, and since today I Googled the story and I actually found it on the internet. I heard the story 30 years ago, and I just thought, I wonder if it's written up somewhere, and I Googled it and I found it. But I'm so happy that I heard it from Rabbi Tauber, because Rabbi Tauber makes an amazing point that I didn't see on the internet. And his point is that when we can't see Hashem, when something blows our mind and we say, where was Hashem? That's possible in the short run. And it's called Chilul Hashem, when there's a vacuum of godliness. A vacuum of godliness is possible in the short run. But Kiddush Hashem, where you see, that is eternal, and that is long run. So I'm going to tell you the story. This story, Rabbi Tauber founded the women's yeshiva that I went to, that was called Netzach Yisrael. He started out as a poor person, and he was religious. He was a chassid, but he pulled himself up by the bootstraps. Hashem made him phenomenally successful, and he founded my women's yeshiva. He founded what's the big men's yeshiva in? He founded Or Sameach in America. He single-handedly supported 35 families that were, where the men were learning Torah all day. He's an astounding person. He also had a lot of connection to an organization called Arachim. And this story he heard through Arachim. This story he heard personally through the main character. So here I'm going to tell you the story. The story took place, it starts out many years ago in World War II. And there was a man, I believe his name was Rabbi Shraga. And Rabbi Shraga was he was in one of the camps. He was in one of the Nazi camps, and he was a prisoner there. And during the time that he was under the Nazis, he did something that nobody else did. there was very little food. There was almost no food that they got, and they had to work so hard. And they would get a little bit of miserable soup every day and a crust of dry bread. And he would turn down the little bit of miserable soup because it very likely was made with non-kosher meat. I mean, they didn't go get kosher meat. It was very likely made with a little piece of pork. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll survive on the little crust of bread. And he did that for the entire time he was in the camp. Came 1945, and the Allies were advancing. And they were so close to this camp, to this Nazi concentration camp or prisoner camp, whatever it was, that you could hear them approaching. And the Nazis, who were incredible sadists, gathered everybody around, gathered all the prisoners, and they said, you know as well as we do that in a matter of hours, this camp is going to be taken over by the Allies, and you'll all be free, and your life will change. And they said, but before that happens, we have something left. We have some business left. And they said, this Shraga, whatever his name was, come here, big shot rabbi. Every day that you were in here, everybody thought you were such a big shot. You probably thought you were a big shot. You didn't eat. Well, I don't know if they said that about the big shot business, but he said, every day that you were here, you were so holy. You didn't eat that little piece of meat in the soup. You didn't have the soup because you didn't want to eat something that was not kosher. Well, you know what, Rabbi? That made perfect sense because what was your life worth in this camp? It was miserable. Life every day was horrible. So life wasn't worth anything. So you could be a big shot like that. But tell us, Rabbi, now that you can taste freedom, now that within hours you can be reunited with your family, if there's anybody left. Now, Rabbi, we want you to eat this piece of pork or we're going to blow your brains out. And this man, I don't know if he knew the halacha or not, or if he just did it based on principle. There is a halacha. If you were a prisoner in that camp and every day this is what they fed you, you could eat the pork. You could eat the soup with the pork because saving a life comes before kashrus. It comes before that. And so you could do it. He didn't do it because he wanted to live on a higher level. He never ate tray food and he didn't want to do it even in the concentration camp. But in this situation, if a Jew is held up as an example in front of at least 10 other Jews, and somebody says to them, violate the Torah or we'll blow your brains out, you are not allowed to violate the Torah because they're doing it to weaken the Torah in everybody's eyes. They're doing it to create a vacuum of godliness, and you're not allowed to do it. So whether he resisted because he knew the halacha or simply because he said, no, this is not something I do, he said, no, I am not doing it. I'm not going to eat that piece of pork. And they kept their promise and they killed him instantly. And after the war, his daughter survived the war. And after the war, she heard what happened to her father in the last hours before liberation. And she said, this is Torah observance, and this is its reward. This is what a person gets for being pious. I'm having nothing to do with Torah. I'm having nothing to do with Judaism. Forget it. Nothing. It's over. Finished. And she went to Israel. She married another person. She married a survivor, another survivor. And someday maybe I'll tell you their story. That's an interesting story too. And she married a survivor and they had children. And as she promised, they were not observant in any way, shape, or form. And she had a son, Yossi, and he grew up very, very bright, very sharp. And his mother brought him up not religious. And he founded, and he started a munitions business. He sold munitions, and he was extraordinarily successful. He became very rich. He had a family, he had kids, he had a wife, and he was an extraordinarily successful munitions dealer. This Yossi had a particular craving. He absolutely loved pork. At that time in Israel, I don't know what the situation is now, but at the time he was a younger man in Israel. you couldn't buy pork everywhere. There was only one exclusive restaurant in Tel Aviv that sold it. And it was called Basar Levan, white meat. And the line to get white meat was so long, it snaked outside the restaurant. People would stand in line to get it if they had this kind of craving. And so even though he was extremely rich, very well off, and he loved pork so much that he would stand in line for hours outside this restaurant in Tel Aviv. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to Tel Aviv, but Tel Aviv can be extremely hot and humid. It's one of the hottest and most humid places that it's really, really hot and humid at times. And one day, on such a day, on a hot and humid day, he's standing there in line for hours, waiting to buy this Basar Levan, and to bring it home to his kids too, who also liked it. And he's sweating bullets. He's just sweating bullets. And all of a sudden, the story comes to him. He heard the story many times about his grandfather. And the story, he reminds himself of the story and he says, wait a minute, my grandfather died not to eat pork. And here I am schwitzing like a pig for hours just to get a piece of pork. One of us is crazy. Either he's crazy or I'm crazy. One of us is crazy. And I don't think it was him. And he didn't buy it. He bought a different dinner for his family. He came home and he talked it over with his wife. And they both felt that there was something missing in their family. And so he decided, he had already heard that there's an organization called Arachim, that in a week, in a little bit less than a week of seminar, they rationally prove the truth of Torah. It's a remarkable, what Arachim created is, it's created by two scientists. It's really a remarkable seminar. And he decided that he's going to go. He went to it. And by the end of, I think it was a 4-day program at that point. By the end of the 4-day program, he was completely convinced. There was no doubt in his mind that Torah came from God, came from Sinai. And he said to them, you guys, you have an amazing product. You have the most amazing thing. You could affect the whole world. How come you have so few people here? And they said, well, we're just two scientists. We put this thing together. We don't have money. We don't have such business acumen. He said, don't worry. And the next day he became the director of Arachim and he made it explode all over. Not only that, has anybody heard of Aish Torah? Aish Torah became big because of Arachim, because I don't know if they became big because of Arachim, but they owe a lot to Arachim. What did Arachim do? Arachim came to Aish Torah. They said, we have this magnificent program. We're doing the Israeli audience. We want you to translate it and bring it to the English-speaking audience. And Aish Torah did it. It's called the Discovery Seminar. It's based on Arachim. It's completely based on Arachim. And so this guy, oh, by the way, he became totally frum. His family's totally frum. And as of 2007, they estimated that there were 60,000 children born into families that turned their lives around based on the Arachim seminar. That was in 2007. It's probably more than 1 million now. So Rabbi Tauber said, and this is such a powerful point, in the short run, they killed that man. They killed Reb Shraga. They killed him. And what a Chilul Hashem. Where was God? Here's this guy, perfect tzaddik, perfect saint. And what does he get from it? He gets his brains blown out. Advance a couple of generations. Where did his strength go? Did it disappear into the earth? Did it count for nothing? No, it exploded in his grandson, who based on his story became frum and helped 1 million people. Yeah, that strength did not disappear. That strength made 1 million frum babies. Yeah. So anyway, Chilul Hashem, the absence of Hashem, is short run. Kiddush Hashem, seeing Hashem, is permanent. So I think it's an amazing point that he gets from that story. Okay, now I'm going to say another very important point and another story. And this point is that when somebody is in a situation where they have a terrible thing that happened to them, then our response is not a lot of words. The best response is simply compassion. That's the best response. And not a lot of explanation, not, oh, but Hashem, this works this way. Sometimes that helps, but very often the person just needs you to be there with them. And when they're experiencing a tremendous chilul Hashem, when they're experiencing a tragedy that's inexplicable. So, so now I'm going to tell a story from Rabbi Yossi Jacobson, who we often quote. After he gave a talk on this topic at one of his somewhere, and afterwards a woman came up to him, and she said, "I want to tell you a story." And he said, "Sure." And she said, "You know, when my son was 4 years old, he developed cancer, and it was terrible. He was in the hospital for a few months, and he suffered tremendously. It brought him tremendous suffering. Only 4 years old, and after he was in the hospital a couple of months, I was sitting with him, and he turned to me and he said, 'Mommy, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen?' And his mother said, 'You know, darling, you never did anything wrong. The only thing I can think of is that maybe in a previous life, because I have to say that reincarnation is a reality, and Judaism, it's one of the 13 principles of Jewish belief. And she said, maybe in a previous life, there was something that wasn't correct. And maybe this is the correction for it. This is the fix for it. This is the tikkun.' She said, my son turned his head away from me. He stopped looking at me. And I knew then and there that I failed him. I knew I failed him. Anyway, the sickness continued. And when he was 6, he was back in the hospital. And again, he turned to his mother and he said, 'Mommy, why did this happen to me? Why am I so different? Why did this happen to me?' And his mother said to Yossi Jacobson, she said, 'I was smarter. I thought I was smarter.' She said, 'I turned to my son and I said, you are a tzaddik, you are a saint. And you know what? Hashem tests tzaddikim. He gives bigger tests to people who are so holy.' She said, she told Rabbi Jacobson, 'My son once again turned his face away from me. And he didn't want to continue the conversation. That was it. I couldn't continue. He didn't want to talk about it anymore.' And she said, 'I knew I blew it again.' She said, 'You know what? After a while, my son got cured. He was much better. He was completely better. He began to live the life of a normal kid.' And she said, but then when he was 11, it came back with a vengeance. It came back with a complete vengeance. And she said, and I was in the hospital with my son. And he said, 'Ma,' he was 11, 'Ma, why did this happen to me?' And she said, and this time, Rabbi Jacobson, I was smarter. I took his hand, I looked at him, I said his name, and I said, 'I don't know.' And this time he didn't look away from me. And he didn't look away. He felt heard. And 2 weeks later, he passed away. And so, it's an incredibly valuable story. And Rabbi Jacobson used the story himself. And at a certain point, he was at Rabbi Jacobson was giving he was giving a presentation to a bunch of teenage boys in a yeshiva, and they were talking, telling stories, singing songs until 2 or 3 in the morning. At 2 or 3 in the morning, a 17-year-old came over to Rabbi Jacobson. He sat down next to him and he said, 'Rabbi Jacobson, why did my mother die?' And Rabbi Jacobson didn't know he didn't know the boy from before. He didn't know why his mother died. And Rabbi Jacobson said, 'I don't know. These are Hashem's mysteries. I don't know. I'm so sorry. How awful, how terribly awful. I don't know.' And the boy started crying. And he started crying and crying and crying. And he said, 'You know, Rabbi Jacobson, my mother passed away 9 years ago. And he said, I've been waiting for that answer, your answer for 9 years. He said, I saw during the past 9 years, I saw how hard it was for my father. My father had to raise a family of 9 kids on his own. And it was so hard. And through the years, people told me, oh, this might be the reason, or that might be the reason, or that might be the reason. And he said, and you know what? Every time somebody said that to me, I was so angry. I was so angry. How dare they think they know? How dare they think they know? And so Rabbi Jacobson explains that we can't explain the mystery of what Hashem does. We can explain some things about the way Hashem works in the world, but why he does a particular thing, we don't know. And somehow it's reductionary to tell somebody you figured it out, you know what Hashem is doing. The person rather wants you to just be there with them and say, I don't know. And I'm going to tell you something, that when I was going through heck and high water with my parents, and I was experiencing infertility at the same time, and I was flying into Delaware constantly. My parents wouldn't move to Boston, and I flew into crisis constantly. You know, I spent 2 months there in several different trips. And I think I flew into emergencies maybe 25 times. I flew to Wilmington Hospital. I figured my soul has some tikkun here. I'm constantly here. And the crises were not simple crises. They were very often hair-raising. And it was so hard for me. And I was working for Beis Yaakov, which is a girls' high school at that time. And I don't know if I had to, I had to talk to the principal about a leave of absence or to take off some time. I don't remember what it was. His name is Rabbi Levin. He's still the principal there. And I was telling him a little bit about what I was going through. And he said to me, I can't imagine what you're going through. And those words were so wonderful. They were so validating. They were so much better than anything anybody had ever said to me. And, and it's so interesting that that's probably not true, because I found out later that Rabbi Levin had been through what I had been through and back and much, much, much more. But it takes a person like that to be able to say something like that. I can't imagine what you're going through. So I want to end with a little story from my life, my personal life. And the point that I'm going to make is that there is a God running the world, and believe it or not, everything is going to be okay. That's the main thing that we have to know. There is a God, we can't understand him at every turn, but there is a God running the world, and things are going to be okay. So I told you in another session that when my mother was even worse than my father. She had more crises than he did. They had so many crises. And in the last 6 weeks of her life, she was 6 weeks before she passed away, she was admitted to the hospital, more dead than alive. They put her on a ventilator, and she came back from the ventilator. She was adorable. She was hysterical. Everybody fell in love with her in the hospital. And my father, my sister, and I were terribly in love with my mother, probably still are. And we watched her like a hawk so that she shouldn't pass away. And my father, I have to say, in the last years of my life, my mother's life, today was my father's yard site. It was his 13th yard site, and this class is in his merit and the merit of Aliyah for his neshama. My father was extraordinary in my mother's last years. My mother's last year, she developed something called multi-infarct dementia. It's actually more common than Alzheimer's, but it's for some reason much less well known. A person has many strokes in their brain, many strokes, and they don't do anything to the person's physical body, but they mess up their thinking. The person gets paranoid, they lose memory, all sorts of things happen. And that happened to my mother. And the paranoia was quite, if she imagined things about my father, all sorts of things. And he had such patience for her. And I remember in those last years, I said, Daddy, you're so wonderful with mommy. You're so incredible. And he said in his Polish accent, what? He said, what? I love her, we've been married for 50 years. What do you want from me? How else should I be? And anyway, so those last 6 weeks, my mother went into the hospital, and my sister and we each flew down. My sister took the train down from New York, or I flew down from Boston to Delaware. And my sister would be with my mother from Friday through Sunday, and I would be with my mother from Monday through Thursday. We did that every week. We had her covered. She was not going to escape from us. And one time, I was there Monday through Thursday, then Marilyn Friday through Sunday. We just kept rotating. And then one week, my mother was doing actually a little bit better. And my sister said, Susan, that's my English name, I'm not going to go down this week. Mommy's doing better. I'm not going to go down. And she didn't go down. And what did my mother do? My mother slipped out when neither my sister nor I were there. And typical of my mother, because I know my mother was so protective of her daughters. She wouldn't want us to see her in the end. I know my mother. So anyway, my mother slipped away on a Shabbos morning. And a few days later, I had a dream. And I had a dream that I was holding on to my mother in a wheelchair. My mother was never in a wheelchair, but in my dream, she was in a wheelchair. And I was holding on to her, and we were going down a mountain. And I'm holding on to this wheelchair with all my life. And I'm guiding my mother, just like I was guiding her those last years of her life. And I was holding on for dear life. And then something awful happened. I don't know how it happened. I let go, and the wheelchair started careening down the mountain by itself. And there I am, and there's the wheelchair rocketing down the mountain. And at the very bottom, the wheelchair hits something, and my mother goes sailing out of the wheelchair. And she lands on her legs. She lands, and she does something like this. And just like, you remember how Nadia Comaneci did in the,
when she landed.
but maybe some of you remember Nadia Comaneci. She was an incredible gymnast, 14 years on. And when they would do something that was a little, and then all of a sudden they'd find themselves and they would go like this. And that was my mother. That's what my mother did. She ended with a gymnast. I have done it. And I knew then and there in my dream, I knew, you know what, Shalom Sihudis, you thought that you were holding on to your mother and you were protecting her for dear life, and that her life was in your hands. Guess what? Your mother's okay. Your mother made it. She did it. She made it. She's fine. And so I want to end with it's not us. We put in our effort, but everything is in Hashem's hands. What we do is effort. It's a mitzvah. Everything we do to protect ourselves and to protect somebody else is a mitzvah. But what happens to us is exclusively Hashem's purview. It's not us. Hashem likes it. We are fulfilling an active commitment to take care of ourselves as well as possible, and to take care of our friends and our family as well as possible. But in the end, what happens is up to Hashem. And I want to say that that's also true with what's happening in the world today. You can watch things on the internet that make your wig stand on end. It's just amazing what's happening now. It's just like, it's shocking. It's like war. It's amazing. The pandemic, politics, everything. And I want to tell you, I came to an amazing conclusion. I think it was the night before last. I came to an amazing conclusion. And you may not buy it, but this is what I feel. I think it's all a distraction. And I think, yes, there is a war going on, but it's not the war that we see on the internet, and it's not the war that we see with hospitals and pandemic and all that. The war is, this is the Geula unfolding. This is Hashem is doing his business. And every Jew has the opportunity now to, we can write a blank check for us and for the world by simply sticking to Hashem and by doing what is in our power to do. If you're politically very active, fine, lobby for whoever you want. But I have to tell you, the most important realm of a person's influence is their personal life. And now is the time. If you don't treat one person as well as you know you should be doing it, that's what you should, that's your power. That's your power to change. If you don't take care of yourself the way you're supposed to, if you're sloppy with your self-care, if you're sloppy in the way you are to somebody else, that's the battle. And the rest, the rest, you can do what you want there. But I feel, I have to tell you that it's so powerful, because what's happening with us, our opportunity now is so great that the distractions have to be enormous, because Hashem has to maintain our free choice. And so when the distractions are enormous out there, do whatever you feel is right out there, but don't forget that your real battleground is connecting to Hashem, is doing what Hashem wants at every minute. That's your opportunity for greatness. So anyway, with that, I'm going to close, and I'm going to tell you that candle lighting, that's an opportunity for greatness. Candle lighting this week. How come it's not here on my sheet?
It's daylight savings, isn't it? It's
5:21. 5:21. It skips in. Yeah. No, it's not yet. Right.
I did.
I think it's 5:21 this week, and I think the next week it's 4:13. But I think this coming week it's 5:21.
Makes sense, but it was
Yeah.
5:31.
5:21.
No, last Friday was 5:31.
Yeah, so it's 5:21. It's 5:21 in Boston this week, in Brighton.
And then
this
we
week.
have the fallback hour this weekend. So
Yes, and so next week is going to be 4:13. So I'm going to stop